Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Criminologist Today. I'm your hostess, Cameron, and today I'm interviewing the esteemed professor, Dr. Todd Byers. Hello, Todd.
Hello, Cameron. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, I think everyone's eager to know, why is this line of work so important to you? You've devoted your life to this, and I'd like to know why.
It's a great question, Cameron, but the answer is really complex. To put it simply, Cameron, my cousin was a serial killer, and I wanted to know what made him tick.
Yeesh. Wow, that's deep stuff. So what does make them tick?
First and foremost, Cameron, let's discuss what a serial killer is. By definition, a serial killer is typically a person who murders 3 or more people, usually in service of abnormal psychological gratification, with the murders taking place over more than a month, including a significant break or a cooling off period between them.
Wow, that's interesting.
Indeed, it is. FBI elitist John Douglas estimates that there are anywhere from 25 to 50 active serial killers in the U.S. alone at any given time. We all know that killers exist, so what's left to know? Well, what makes them tick? There are people that think serial killers are born, and there are others that think they are created.
Well, what do you think it is?
I think that it's a combination of both. I think that serial killers aren't born into a fate of killing. Frankly, that sounds ridiculous to me. But I don't think they just snap into it either.
So how do you think it happens then?
Excellent question. I think it's a mix of psychological, biological, and environmental factors.
Aren't biological and psychological sort of the same thing?
Yes and no, Cameron. Technically, psychological can fall under the umbrella term of biological, but nothing is that simple in science.
Makes sense, I guess. Tell me more.
Well, let's start with the psychology of it all. Naturally, you assume that a serial killer has something wrong with them, yes?
I think so, yes. I'd probably assume they're a psychopath.
Well, you're right to assume so, Cameron. In fact, the Scientific American paper, Inside the Mind of a Psychopath, agrees with you. Psychopathic serial killers are not merely selfish. Their brains process information differently from those of other people. It is if they have a learning disability that impairs emotional development.
For those of us not familiar with psychopathy, can you refresh their minds on it?
Absolutely. The traits a functioning psychopath might have include considerable superficial charm, average to above average intelligence, an absence of anxiety or any signs of irrational thinking, poise and calmness, untruthfulness, a lack of remorse, poor judgment, and antisocial behavior, among other things.
But not all serial killers are psychopaths, surely.
Yes, just as not all psychopaths are killers. There are other psychological explanations as to why someone chooses to become a repeat violent offender. That's what we call serial killers to sound smart. Some personalities are simply more predisposed to violence. Serial killers tend to display traits such as having a family with a history of psychological or behavioral problems, seeming to lack emotion or empathy, high impulsiveness and aggressiveness, a lack of close friends and family, extreme or even slight insecurity, instability, sexual undertones, and or a perceived inability to show love. Some some psychological issues can be caused by accidents, such as the case was with as Richard Ramirez and Earl Nelson, who have both been reported to have experienced at least one or more traumatic head injuries as a child. Studies have also shown that disorders such as antisocial personality disorder and autism are said to have an effect as to whether or not a potential offender chooses to kill.
But you think that it can't be just this alone that causes a killer?
Of course not. Not everyone with autism is a killer, not even close. so it can't be psychology alone. No, there is something else going on.
Oh, well, tell me more about the biology of it all.
Well, I'll keep this brief so as not to bore you, but there are things such as MAOA that have been correlated to killing. MAOA is used to break down neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. Genetic makeup is a huge aspect of criminality, to put it simply. There are several biological markers for potential criminality. Being male, certain gene variants, a low resting heart rate, brain damage, and or a mother who smoked and drank while carrying you in her womb. There was also a study done by a Dr. Helen Morrison who studied and interviewed 135 serial killers, according to an infographic completed by the website Best Counseling Degrees. She believes that in many cases the killers suffered a chromosome abnormality that led them to have an extra chromosome in their DNA. This was the case for killers like Bobby Joe Long, who had an extra X chromosome, and Richard Speck, who had an extra Y chromosome.
Certainly, there are people with similar genetic makeups that choose not to offend violently.
Absolutely. Like Deborah Deno says, while genes influence behavior, they do not govern nor determine it. It is much more than that.
Tell me more about the environmental aspect.
Well, factors such as abuse in childhood or generally traumatic experiences can make an individual more receptive to resorting to serial killing. In a study presented by FBI agents, 36 serial killers were evaluated. It was found that nearly all of the serial killers exhibited traits such as daydreaming, chronic lying, compulsive masturbation, bedwetting, and cruelty to animals. All of these facts support the idea more strongly that serial killers are not only born because these factors, child abuse, trauma, and personality traits, are all formed after birth.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Cameron. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.